Hello, Tom.
Hello, Barney. What a wonderful background sound.
We've got two things going on here.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time in recording history, you are getting me using my Yeti Blue.
Ooh, moving on up, moving on up.
Exactly. And I've got the door open,
Ooh,
which will give you birdsong.
wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
We may get some cars driving by because this is the modern world, so let me know if...
Believe me, it is far quieter and more deliciously delicate than anything I could have given you in San Jose, which would have been ambulances, and a wide variety of cement trucks. So, Anyway.
So if I'm loud enough, I hope that's all right.
Okay, if that's going to be the loudness of the cars, perhaps close the window. I've had the birdsong initially, but that kind of drowns out everything.
If I could tastefully, open the door later when it's time to go. I don't know. I'm joking.
Okay.
So is that all right level-wise?
Yeah, no, it's perfect. It's perfect. You sound much crisper than you've ever sounded previously in our recording, so I'm going to utilise this as much as possible.
Yeah, you'd hope so after paying for that. I like it. It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing.
I've gone through maybe 3 or 4 generations of Yeti, and the middle generations, when they dropped the price, the quality just fell out from underneath them. So I have a box of 2 Yetis, and my original Yeti, I think I gave to someone. But yeah, it was a mic that when it first came out, really crisp, dropped off in quality, all kinds of static and other horrible stuff. But you've obviously purchased well because your Yeti is very, very crisp. Wonderful.
Good.
Well, I think this is my podcast, so I probably should give an introduction, and then we can get recording.
Yeah.
Welcome to the My Rules Are Better podcast. I'm Tom Barney. If I seem a little bit more, baseful, maybe a little bit more whimsical, it is because it is 6 a.m. here, and these are the restrictions that one needs to meet in order to have the luxury of chatting with Barney Dicker these days. Barney, it's a pleasure as always to have the chance to chat with you.
Thanks for getting up. Yeah, nice and early for you. I'm luxuriating in Friday afternoon.
Believe me. Unfortunately, my Friday afternoon looks rather brutal. They had told me I could take the 2 formerly religious days off, but unfortunately, the nature of my work means that I'll be probably working about the same time, your time. Anyway, I have 2 large cups of caffeine in front of me and a number of topics to discuss with you.
Yeah.
I wanted to start by saying this has been another 5 months of not having the opportunity to chat with you. And I think actually in our podcasting relationship, this has probably been the most interesting 5 months because I've had so many questions. So many questions through the months. I thought I probably could frame them to you either in audio or email, but I decided somewhere through this thing, probably about 2 months ago, there was far more interesting for me to create a counter-narrative to your podcast, or more importantly, create a narrative to the bits that I found missing in your podcast, waiting for some contradiction in time where you corrected me. And one of the things that I found most interesting through this period of time is the League of Eternal ...
Guardians,
Well, Guardians in your case. I probably about 2 months ago realized that I needed to create a secondary game or a game based on what I thought League of Eternal Guardians was based on. Just to see whenever you would actually correct me in the podcast and if I could make any sense out of what was going on here. Okay. And it only really struck me when I moved about a month ago into this house, exactly the direction that I needed this game to take, in particular because of the kind of spindly imagery that I was consuming associated with your particular game. And when we moved into this house, the refrigerator didn't work. And it was something that struck me that it worked enough to appear like it was a refrigerator, but then you just put stuff in and you'd realize, oh, wait, it's like 42 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is about 7 or 8 degrees Celsius in this thing. We couldn't get it any cooler. So we had this amazing effect of everything that we put in started to deteriorate in rather interesting and fascinating ways. Okay. And I thought, this is the game. So I came up with, and this is why when you posted about food poisoning a day early, I was like, no, he's beaten me to it. Anyway, I created this game called the League of Eternal Sandwiches. Okay. And the idea of the League of Eternal Sandwiches, it's a grid-based game, is that you first roll up what kind of sandwich you're having. You roll up the ingredients of said sandwich. And then basically it's a bacterial land grab with the sandwich itself as the various bacteria and stuff. And there are a number of dimensions to this game. One of my favorite dimensions to it is whether or not you want to kill the consumer of the sandwich, or you just want to put them off eating the sandwich sufficiently that you become an eternal sandwich. You see, the aim is to become an eternal sandwich.
I see.
So there are various stratagems, and I expanded it actually when I realized, obviously, I was missing some major demographics in the US. So I included hamburgers and what they call chicken sandwiches in this country as well. I haven't moved it to fish tacos yet. The rules would need to change for that. But the idea is basically that you play the spread out different diversity of sandwich-related bacteria. And the size of the bites is really critical. So part of the thing early on is you roll for the size of the bites with a view that maybe, if you've ever eaten something which isn't quite right, the first reaction is to share it with someone else to show them how not quite right it is. So there are these kind of elements as well. Like, is it a shared sandwich? Are you just looking to kill the sandwich eater quickly? Are you looking just to put the sandwich eater off sufficiently that they throw the sandwich away, which still makes you an eternal sandwich, might I add?
Yeah.
So anyway, this is the League of Eternal Sandwiches. I would like to put it out. Unfortunately, your listeners aren't listening into this, but I think this is actually a practical. Anyway, here's what's fascinating.
Well, I'll do my best to get my listeners to listen to this as well. And I mean, there's so much potential there. In between death and annoyance, maybe you've got all kinds of evolutionary mutations.
Believe me. So yes, that is certainly a secondary aim of the game as well. But I wanted to point out something really interesting, which I think illustrates the nature of my problem over the past 5 months.
Yeah.
Your description of your league and my description of the League of Eternal Sandwiches, there's nothing that I've heard so far to correct any. I mean, for folks listening in, is the intention just to be as obtuse as possible with the view that this is a secret game that is going to be released at some stage in the future? I also understand that there is a sister podcast of yours that actually is probably the primary source to find information about this game, which I've neatly avoided while I can continue thinking about my poisoning sandwiches game. But I guess for folks listening in, this is my podcast, right?
Yeah.
Very little likelihood of any of your listeners actually listening to this podcast. Let's talk a little bit about what the background for your league is. Yeah. And maybe why, I don't know, the secrecy and just the general, and in communicating with you initially, I couldn't really gather whether the secrecy was intentional or whether, particularly when I used the term boys club to describe the nature of the secrecy. So, Barney, the forum is yours.
Okay. So this is our little boys club now, isn't it? Okay. So the League of Eternal Guardians, this is the backstory to it. I got into I've been having a long running chat with another podcaster called Andy Goodman, who has the Expedition to the Grizzly Peaks podcast, and now Grizzly Peaks Radio, where he puts actual plays up. And we've been having this long debate about prep, no prep, specifically in relation to Call of Cthulhu and those kinds of investigative horror type of games. And we hatched this idea that we wanted to run some improvised investigations. And we called that the Eldritch Organ. And we did host those discussions on his expedition to the Grizzly Peaks. So before Christmas, so I think December-ish, it probably started November, December. A number of his episodes are Eldritch Organ themed. And at one particular point, he said that he likes naive investigators who are exposed to this horrific underbelly of reality, where you find Cthulhu and co. And I said, I like Van Helsing's. I like knowledgeable, knowing investigators who know that something bad is going on. Because in my mind, it doesn't really alter anything. It just sets the bar a little bit higher for the type of challenge or the type of ingenuity that the players and the game master are bringing to the game. And we decided to run these games, these improvised investigation games, or these improvised Eldritch games, whatever you want to call them, Cthulhu games. And I had an old rule system half finished, and I started thinking, I think it might suit it might suit these games very well, because I'd just done a kind of superhero redraft of it, and I realised that, of course, that, if you like, is not a million miles away from a Van Helsing type of character, a monster hunter. So I converted the rules again to fit the Eldritch Organ idea, and just about managed to get them ready for the time of our games. And it just really fitted and kind of finished the system for me and fleshed itself out very rapidly. And the group of players that Andy and I have involved in the Eldritch Organ games have all really responded well to it. And that was really inspiring. And I wasn't entirely expecting that. So it was a nice surprise.
So many parts to this thing. So in terms of, to have a group that is sympathetic to an not even untested, partially written rule system being used, I guess Cthulhu and a lot of background to Cthulhu leads into a number of points of my interest, but I'm not very well read in the source material, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But I do understand the concept of war-related terror, obviously, Tolkien et al., and its impact on literature and just general perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Your setting, or at least what was posted briefly yesterday, again, I'm clawing at small elements that I have actually been exposed to, indicates that you were going for a much older setting.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of the game, or is that something where you've tweaked it in that direction and just are looking forward to testing that out?
That's a wonderful question. I mean, just to say, the rules are super minimalist. They, in total, like the core rules are 2 pages or something. So it's really, really boiled down. So the kind of tweaking that's taken place through playtesting has been very small. And of course that always feels very significant when you're the designer. The closer you get to it feeling fully rounded and finished, at the end, it's these tiny little increments and things just slot into place. So, and at the same time, the changes would seem almost cosmetic, perhaps, to someone else. So that's happened. The other premise, so the actual premise for the League of Eternal Guardians, the Eternal Guardians are basically immortal. You do die, but you can get reanimated or reincarnated. And maybe I can talk a bit about that as a game principle later on. But the Eternal Guardians exist to basically firefight these constant non-linear attacks against reality by these cosmic horrors. So the League are able to teleport and transport their guardians to any time or space. And that's the way the adventures work. And there's no need to worry about anomalies and so on, because they just add to the fun of it all. And so the fact that I'm setting this new adventure in Constantinople in 541 AD or whatever it is totally within keeping of the system. You can be a guardian from any time, any place. And the way in, if you like, is that your character will have survived some encounter with these evil creatures and survived almost by chance or fluke or some way. And that generates a nice premise upon which to hang your character and define your character, and that is how they belong within the League, even if they're being teleported backwards, forwards, left and right through time and space.
So you're still basing it on, I mean, again, not totally familiar, aside from the voluminous amount of kind of Cthulhu-related role-playing works, which I think there's some basis on that too, right? In terms of you are relying on players that have utilized that style and perspective previously, and that is really intertwined with components of the game, if not every aspect of it, right?
Yes. But I'm no massive Cthulhu aficionado. I'm no orthodox. I'm not orthodox, and I personally.
Are your cohorts though?
Andy likes it very, very much, and there might be some other players who are into it too. But I don't think nobody's exclusively so. And I mean, for me, there are questions over what is the difference between, if you like, ordinary supernatural horror and Lovecraftian cosmic horror. To me, they are. It's all a realm of supernatural horror. If such things can exist, or we imagine that they can exist, then of course you're going to have different types of monsters at different scales in the universe, because we're all in the universe. So it's not intended to cramp the style of Call of Cthulhu. I mean, it never will. That's a massive thing, and it's not, and neither is it the first other Lovecraftian type of horror. And what I wanted to do as well was kind of meld it with a kind of Michael Moorcock inflection, and have these, because have these kind of he's got eternal champions, and I wanted to have eternal guardians.
So do they show up to Brexit or the Trump campaign?
They could go anywhere, Tom. They could even use toxic sandwiches.
Very good. Yeah, both applicable. Both applicable to Brexit and the Trump campaign. I like the segue. So I didn't necessarily want to talk too heavily about like the deeper details of the game until it was something that was more available. I guess that's my terminology to this, because I think what I'm trying to illustrate here is almost the responsibility, not necessarily to be repetitive in a podcast, but just to give sufficient details to kind of carry it through. And I think certainly, I mean, this is a fascinating area, and one that I'd like to talk to you about with more detail once I've always, the whole nature of vast war and its effect on the human psyche, particularly with regards to creating the supernatural, is something that I find really fascinating. Because I think the impact of these, and I'm wondering actually what the contemporary conflicts might fuel in the future associated with what an Afghanistan Cthulhu would look like, or, these kind of things. Because I think certainly both the First and the Second World War punctuated huge, creative, disturbing, gothic horror elements to it, of which I certainly, put Cthulhu as part of that. The Second World War and its impact particularly on vast aspects of American culture in a very curious kind of gothic horror fashion, I find fascinating as well.
I mean, I think now that it's really interesting that we now have these phrases like Weird War or Weird West.
Definitely.
It plays with the alliteration of in those titles, but also these alternative histories. So that's definitely there.
I subscribe to in fact, they contacted me first, but I subscribe to a weird World War II podcast that explores all these weird World War II games that have come out. And it's interesting, actually, because I've realized through that, and in part because of my work on Sea Lion as well, that I'm a World War II purist. I think the more that you learn about World War II, the less you know about World War II, really fundamentally. So I think it is fascinating that these games are coming out now in in terms of World War II specifically, are very well defined, but no one has really bridged, Vietnam yet. No one's really looking into like what would weird war Afghanistan look like. And I think one of the fascinating things is just so in order to get to Lovecraft with a little bit of green stuff, which is the putty that you apply to miniatures, you don't need to do really that much. And my friend in England, Roachy Roachford, took some Imperial Guard Steel Legion, which are kind of quintessentially on the boundaries of both World War I and World War II, applied a bit of putty, and they looked Lovecraftian perfectly. So
they're great. They're great.
It fascinates me the steps that are changed in various directions, but you're doing that for more than just the traditional Cthulhu timeframes. So I think it's fascinating, particularly Constantinople at the period of time that you picked, in terms of flux and, it's interesting that you could take history and then frame it with something curious and cosmic that needs to be solved. So yes, you have sent me off in a variety of different directions, which makes me think we probably need to have this conversation in 6 months' time when the rules are available in some physical form.
I tell you what, Tom. Then to kind of segue to whatever question is coming next. Your point about maybe repeating one's projects, and the necessity for that, and that certain things aren't clear in what I present. I mean, I remember putting the same kind of question to you when you came onto my podcast, because it's not always clear to me what exactly the state of your projects are. And so what all of this points to is just how wonderful it is to have, people that you can converse with.
Certainly.
Who will ask you those questions, and you can continue. You can have that ongoing debate. It's totally essential, and that's what's been great about kind of developing this with Andy as well for his. He's got his interests and his version.
And you've known Andy forever, right? That wasn't clear.
No. No. We've only we've only since both starting podcasts on Anchor.
Okay, interesting.
Become friends. But the touch point, really, for both of us with the Eldritch Organ was that we came up with a list of, I think now we're at something like 11, 12 or 13, a list of different things that we ask players in a game to contribute, like a setting, a time period, an NPC, an occult item, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And then the GM randomly rolls those. And that is wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. So a little while ago, we had a game that was set in the medieval. So this was the League of Eternal Guardians. They went to medieval Paris, and there was a 1960s telephone box as an object somewhere. And so just the fun of thinking how to sling those things together. And I literally randomly generated those elements as we started playing. And we got of the 12 or 13, let's say there were, I think we did we got through something like 8 in the first session, and then in the second session we did the last 4 or something like that. So as a catalyzer for these games, and to generate a certain kind of group dynamic, that's the specific thing that Eldritch Organ is offering, if you like, that we've been working on, and it's been really a lot of fun to do that.
Interesting. So you give the player something familiar, which you then, as the GM, have some additional knowledge of that the player didn't have when they first created it, and then they find it in the adventure as a kind of a touchstone of familiarity through the adventure.
Well, of course, because the players have contributed all of these elements, what's interesting is that they then recognise, or hopefully recognise, their own elements as they emerge in the game. But surprisingly, that doesn't always happen, especially if you kind of defamiliarise it as you describe it, or the penny drops much later. And that, I think, has an interesting frisson between the player and the character, and them having hunches about the nature of the mystery taking place. I think the mind automatically starts to do things. For example, when the telephone box pops up, the player that suggested the telephone box knows something of the character or quality of that phone box because they suggested it.
But they think they know, because basically the GM's already messed with them in some regard, which they haven't specified specifically, but they obviously have to have an interaction with the thing to get to realise, this isn't quite what I thought it was, right?
Well, that is true. However, I've stayed pretty close to whatever was stated. So, for example, telephone box. This telephone box contained, telephone numbers, sex lines to call. But
Throughout time or just for a specific time?
Well, that's the kind of detail. It doesn't matter, Tom, for all time.
Oh, believe
me.
Time. Sex lines for all time?
Sex lines for all time. You heard it here first.
You've named the podcast, Barney. Very good.
When you ring those numbers, it summons a mythos deity. And so that was the object. That was the occult object, if you like. So of course you can finesse things a little bit, but because you're combining so many different elements, there's not actually that much need to split things up, and people naturally forget. And of course, this is part of the experiment. It's fun when they have a hunch, because then they can say, no, don't go in the phone box, or okay, let's go and see what's in. That generates another dimension to it. Like I say, this kind of frisson between the player and their character, or the game world and the table.
Barney, you've offered many possibilities, but I did want to start to explore tone with you.
Yes.
Because I also find this fascinating, and shout outs to Matthew Gibson, because a lot of this seems to harken back to our discussion on the N-word here, the terrible N-word being narrative specifically. Yes. Talk a little bit about because I think as a creator of rules, playing those rules with people, you have a different experience, particularly around setting of tone, than, for example, when I, ripped off alluvial plains and did a single day of disaster around it. Have others done that as well? Just a sideline question.
No, you're still the reigning champion.
People. Yeah. I've got about 2 hours left to get you the details of fighting monstrous creatures, and it's still very much on the. In fact, I was going to complete it last night, but I had a rather bad migraine. It's on that kind of nearly ready to get to you.
Fabulous.
So, with the view that actually it's about more creating a sense of, even though this creature is huge, there are still weak points that we need to exploit through our battling techniques to get to it. Anyway, let's return to this notion of tone here. When you create a rule system, you have an intimacy with it, specifically where you don't have to write stuff down necessarily, and you can kind of create the tone in the interaction. But as you're now talking about, some of these games that you're talking about are going to be part of Kickstarter. Some of them are going to be part of additional things on Kickstarter. In terms of the movement, which obviously I'm going through as well, in the movement towards commercialization in some regard of these ideas, how do you feel responsible to pass on tone when you aren't intimately connected with the playing of your rule systems?
Okay, interesting. Okay, so we're connecting this a little bit to questions of narrative as well, and evoking a tone to encourage people to pick it up, right, or to make it appeal.
Amen.
So, just as a kind of opening gambit, I would say that tone can be diametrically opposed to narrative. That would be my opening proposition. I don't mean it as a hard and fast thing, but it could be running in the opposite, or not the opposite, the diametric, the perpendicular, running perpendicular, is that right? Sideways, laterally from.
It's whether you want it ever to connect or whether they're running away from each other. Is the distinction with that?
Well,
but anyway.
They would effectively be parallel. They can weave. It's not the opposite. It's not going the opposite direction. It's going parallel to it or laterally to it. And I guess for me, I suppose I'm more interested in jumping laterally, if you like, through tonal possibilities, rather than to lock on to perhaps one tonal core and then progress a narrative from there. If I had to choose, I would rather move through different forms of tone, which I take as existing from in a range from the mechanical to the setting fluff levels, and I would want to move through all of those. That would be my preference. But of course, you can always say that a narrative emerges from that, and characters grow and develop. And for some people, that's a kind of a narrative thing. Whereas I perhaps would say that's maybe more of a tonal thing.
So I'm slightly lost in the metaphor, but I want to give some example of the way I think of it to see if we're talking about the same thing. So in the late 80s, I think, there was the Middle-earth role-playing game, which came out. And I picked up a couple of books, like anything of this era. I never could get everything, but I got a couple of books that, through the visual imagery and elements of reading the rules and a variety of different things, I came to what the tone of this game was, and I loved the tone of the game because it enabled me to explore a somewhat beloved text in a completely different direction. And the rule system was secondary to this emotional connection that I had looking through at the pictures and some of the rules and some of the, and it put my mind in a different direction.
So how different was that to what you already knew of Tolkien? What you'd already
completely
seen
different. No. This was actually really quite intimate. I never felt intimately connected with Tolkien, certainly as I, blistered through it and, the reading process of this kind of stuff. But I realized it was a nerd treatise that I just had to go through. It's like a baptism by fire that, all nerds have to attain. And so I went through it with that philosophy, but it was the subtleties and the nuances, particularly of the Hobbit interactions, which obviously were in the original Tolkien, but that I realized was that the Hobbits were actually a metaphor for kind of every man. And I've had this periodically as I wander through New Zealand and actually find Hobbiton as a thing. And I realized that basically it's just the best aspects of, rural England or Germany or France, or kind of made more quaint. But I think the nature of the hobbits as being incredibly fragile in the setting, not wanting to necessarily fully arm or armor or this kind of stuff, and that fragility being a prerequisite for the way in which they not only took on the universe, but also became really critical kind of adventurer party partners. And that element, which is so clear to probably a majority of people when they read Tolkien, but to me required this rule set to kind of spin off in this different direction. And a large part of it was the artwork, this kind of intimacy of, hobbits fishing and hobbits smoking fish and, all this kind of stuff. But part of it was perfectly captured by the fact that this rule system decided to focus on that aspect of this thing. Obviously, wild, crazy spiders, dragons, eyes of terror and doom and all this kind of stuff as well, but took to just exploring that particular aspect. And this rule system did it for a variety of different elements of the Tolkien mythology. So I think tone for me is kind of grounded in this emotion, which makes it really difficult to actually describe in small sentences. And I think that is the sticky element of a lot of these games, which actually make them kind of beloved games in one sense, but also then create an environment where when like-minded folk get together to play these games, they're in fact looking to synthesize this tone in a kind of community. And this is actually incredibly important when creating rule systems. Am I describing this correctly? By your perspective too?
Yeah, I certainly don't think you're not saying anything wrong as far as I'm concerned. What it makes me think of there is that I think in this gaming community, basically you have to like non-fiction as well as fiction, because the rule books are large part non-fiction. And of course, at the most extreme end, we've got rules explanations and so on, and character sheets are like forms, and all of the maths and stuff that we can get into with games, and the kind of lists and so on, they come up quite a lot. So these are all, so then what did I want to get to? I think that the setting of a game also belongs partly to the non-fiction mindset, because it's not fictional in the sense of reading a book. We might get bits of fluff prose text, fictional short story type of text, but those surprisingly are I would think don't always gel with people, or they might seem a bit more out of the way. Whereas reading about a fictional setting presented in a non-fictional way, where you have stats for things or maps for things, traditions, so on and so on. So that obviously appeals to people a great deal. So I think maybe this tone and setting has a lot to do with this mid-ground, this balancing act between fictional and non-fictional modes. And that, of course, correlates, I think, very clearly with the table talk and the game world. And as we've talked about before, that we're always shifting ever so slightly between those two things. For me, the energy is in that oscillation between players and characters, fictions and play. So for me, metagaming is not an issue at all. There's no problem. And in terms of League of Eternal Guardians, I deliberately made it a feature that they have telepathic communication. Just to completely embed in the setting, in the world, the fact that people are allowed to talk to each other and confer, because it's ridiculous when you're playing a game to have secret information most of the time. So I think that is significant. We're going to talk a little bit about illustration, aren't we? So I'll just and imagery. I'll park that for a moment, because what I did want to say is that with League of Eternal Guardians, I am trying to keep the canonical world, the canonical setting, as minimal as possible. And I'm trying to make the premise as evocative and multifaceted as possible in the most condensed ways.
Well, the canonical setting changes, right? That's the definition of the game almost, is that you take a similar group of players, throw them in a completely different setting, and then see what comes out of that, basically.
And so, for example, if we take advantage of string theory types of ideas, something that you and I could events that you and I could influence in a particular game could be completely different in another game. And again, with other players, there's no linear chronology. So the evils that are always trying to corrupt every dimension are doing so at different points in the continuum. So events in the future will open up a new weak point in the past, which the eldritch evils will take advantage of, which means that the Guardians need to go back to that point in that particular dimension. So yeah, there's no limit to all of that fun. And I guess that is also an aspect of the tone of the game. I want it to feel accessible in all sorts of different ways. So it all uses D6. It's designed to let people basically do what they want, whilst still having a mechanical skeleton that will serve its purpose well. So I want people to be able to say, "Can I do this?" And the answer is yes. Give me a roll, or that kind of thing.
Let's talk a little bit about illustration, and I'll frame it in terms of my current experiences. Mm-hmm. You and I have, through our conversations, have perpetuated a bit of a lie, which I have to apologise. I think most of the listeners to this podcast already know where I might be going with this. But I had long had this kind of mythical relationship with a rule system that I wrote when I was, and now I've actually got the dates in front of me, when I was, 9 through to 12, the Britannia rule system, where I referred back to it as long lost and what have you. Mm-hmm. Through the process of moving here to Las Vegas, where I'm now talking to you from, I found the rule system and was again completely mind blown by the hundreds, tens to hundreds of pages of cursively written script in my own childlike hand describing an environment to an amazing level of detail in order to create, going against the previously positive minimalist discussion of rules, to create an environment which I thought was incredibly, which carried on and was evocative for many years. I mean, I played it socially probably till I was at least 16, maybe with some rules inflections and a few changes, but still, this was a rule system that I really felt very passionately about, and having been distanced from it for such a long period of time, it had developed its own mythology. Anyway, found the book, went back through it. Working with an artist who had presented themselves to me, I'm intentionally being rather cryptic associated with this because none of the parties have agreed to go public until we actually launch this thing in some formal setting. I presented very minimal setting information to the artist and had the artist create now tens of illustrations associated with their particular perspective on this environment. And through that, very early on came mythology, which is the artist's own particular interest, not just Nordic and Irish and, mainland UK mythology, but a variety of different textures that I had some degree of intimacy with as well. Now, to be frank, the Britannia rule system never had any true magic. In fact, it had more kind of psychomagic properties where, it was agreed upon that something magic had happened, even though it probably was just something perfectly normal that had minimal influence, which is one of the things I wanted to add to Alluvial Plains specifically, and we kind of had in some kind of discourse. Anyway, we now have a mythology in addition to this rule system based purely on artistic creation. And then obviously coming back to me and then me writing text associated with it. So there's now an increasing volume of, as you described, this kind of fiction/non-fiction, where it's pure fiction but actually defines elements in the game. And the role that illustrations provide, I have sought out illustrators at various times in my life. Probably the first 2 or 3 serious girlfriends I had were all illustrators in some fundamental sense, and I like nothing more than, I'm serious, I like sitting down with them, talking with them, and the nature of our kind of intimacy was also framed by them drawing these amazingly elaborate pictures. My simulation software in particular, now married to my wife, the face of the ape, which has been so iconic for so many years, actually comes from one of these ex-girlfriends. So the face of the ape was one of the things that, my wife has always looked at, like, maybe we can change this at some stage. But seriously, my relationship with illustrators has always been magical. Like, really, when it happens in my life, I'm like, I've got to cultivate this as best as possible. And usually it ends in tears, hence the previous relationships associated with this. But I think what fascinates me is that and part of this is early childhood. Like, I was thrust into learning instruments and stuff where probably if I had a pen and paper, I would be a drawer, but I'm not a drawer. So, but this element of magic, and also how in my own experience with this rule system, and might I say the rule system that I'm creating, is not even really tangentially based on the old Britannia rule system, aside from the setting itself and the kind of magic in the setting. But you've had a similar experience, maybe not as laboured as I've had with regards to illustration and its impact on what you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about your experience?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I guess I always wanted to be an artist, and I got into filmmaking as for study, and then got into academia. So I'm like an undeveloped artist, I suppose. Quite often I've exhibited things and I've made films and so on. So it's not that I don't or I haven't done those kinds of things, but when what we're talking about here is working with people who are illustrators, who are, amazing. They have a relationship with mark making, which perhaps you and I have closer with writing or something like that, or other people with other things or whatever. So for me at the moment, one of the really wonderful thing in my life is my collaboration with David Sermon, who is a fine artist, an illustrator, and who I've known for, maybe that's who you were referring to before, but who I've known for more than half of my life. And you could say that started with an idea I had for a short film back when we were students, and David drew drew a couple of images for that. And, his work is just mind blowing. And we've always been in touch, even when he was in Australia, and even now as I'm in Germany. But and more recently, I guess we've both got back into role play gaming and board gaming to a degree. But so he plays D&D, he GMs D&D, and so our friendship and the collaboration has really taken another fantastic step. And so David is working on Alluvial Plains with you and with Spencer and me. That's the team. And David is also illustrating League of Eternal Guardians. And I suppose for the big discussion, I would refer people to the last couple of episodes on my podcast about Tone, partly because his work did trigger that off. And so in a nutshell, seeing the images that David started to produce for League of Eternal Guardians showed me aspects of the game or the tone of the game that I had been a little bit blind to, namely that it is a humorous game. I was going to use words like knockabout, because in some ways it is, but I don't want to say that it's superficial or light or something like that. It's minimalist and it's humorous and hopefully grisly at times. But David's drawings really did start to make me more aware of what actually happens at the table, and that's already something that I try and be quite aware of. So I think that's why it probably leaped up at me, and because his pictures were inspired by listening to the actual play of League of Eternal Guardians, which listeners can find on Grizzly Peaks Radio, Eldritch Organ 1, League of Eternal Guardians. So his work came directly from, if you like, the recorded material. So not the rules, but the gameplay. And I think that's great. Now, of course, that's different. That's a different setup to what you're talking about with Britannia, where you've been deliberately, you've kept your background information deliberately scant, and you've waited to see what the artists generate. For me, all of this points to the fact that it's a really great opportunity for groups of individuals to express themselves in their own ways and to kind of hold those contributions up as mirrors to each other and to find interesting ways of working and to produce things that cohere. And this may be in a slightly, commercial sense, in the healthy sense of that word, to things that cohere in a way that reflects those creators without necessarily anyone who engages with it feeling like they've really got a piece of the artist's intention, because I don't completely subscribe to that kind of idea. I guess with Alluvial Plains and with League of Eternal Guardians, for me, my motivation is to see systems and settings emerge that appeal to me, and from there to work with other people who have similar kinds of interests, and for that to grow on and grow on. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the offer of, say, League of Eternal Guardians would hopefully be, if you like, accurate or sincere, and that would be enough, or that is enough, I hope, to appeal to certain people, and for them to feel that they can pick it up and do what they want. What their vision of it would be, to play it how they want to play it.
Well, let me set my watch to 5 months' time. And plan on speaking again, hopefully, hopefully. There will be certain changes in my life by that time. I mean, even moving has been a bit of a change, but hopefully I'll have other things to discuss as well. But it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, Barney. And I think this this aloofness that I find in listening to your podcast is primarily just setting topics for when we talk next.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not intentional. It's just life happening. I think that's life makes one aloof.
Amen. Yeah, look forward to consuming more of your podcast, and hopefully you'll consume some of mine as well.
Indeed, always. Thank you ever so much for having me on again.